1952 UFO Incident occurring in Washington, D.C. From July 12 to 29, 1952, a series of unidentified flying object sightings were reported in Washington, D.C., and later became known as the Washington Flap, the Washington National Airport sightings, or the invasion of Washington. At 11:40 p.m. on Saturday, July 19, 1952, Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, spotted 7 objects on his radar. The objects were located 15 miles south-southwest of the city. No known aircraft were in the area and the objects were not following any established flight paths. Nugent's superior, Harry Barnes, a senior air traffic controller at the airport, watched the objects on Nugent's radarscope. Barnes had 2 controllers check Nugent's radar. They found that it was working normally. Barnes then called National Airport's radar-equipped control tower. The controllers there, Howard Coughlin and Joe Zacco, said that they also had unidentified blips on their radar screen, and saw a hovering, bright light in the sky, which departed with incredible speed. At this point, other objects appeared in all sectors of the radarscope. When they moved over the White House in the United States Capitol, Barnes called Andrews Air Force Base, located 10 miles from National Airport. Although Andrews reported that they had no unusual objects on their radar, an airman soon called the base's control tower to report the sighting of a strange object. Airman William Brady, who was in the tower, then saw an object which appeared to be like an orange ball of fire, trailing a tail. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. As Brady tried to alert the other personnel in the tower, the strange object took off at an unbelievable speed. After spotting what he believed to be a meteor, he was told that the control tower's radar had detected unknown objects closing in on his position. Pearman observed 6 objects, white, tailless, fast-moving lights, over a 14-minute period. At Andrews Air Force Base, the control tower personnel were tracking on radar what some thought to be unknown objects, but others suspected, and in one instance were able to prove, were simply stars and meteors. Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport observed an orange-red light to the south. The light would appear to stand still, then make an abrupt change in direction and altitude. This happened several times. At one point, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews Air Force Base were tracking an object hovering over a radio beacon. The object vanished in all 3 radar centers at the same time. At 3 a.m., shortly before 2 United States Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington, all of the objects vanished from the radar at National Airport. Upon returning to Dayton, Ruppelt spoke with an Air Force radar specialist, Captain Roy James, who felt that unusual weather conditions could have caused the unknown radar targets. Within minutes, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews AFB were tracking more unknown objects. Albert M. Chopp, the press spokesman for Project Blue Book, arrived at National Airport and, due to security concerns, denied several reporters' requests to photograph the radar screens. By this time, the radar center was detecting unknown objects in every sector. At times, the objects traveled slowly. At other times, they reversed direction and moved across the radarscope at speeds calculated at up to 7,000 miles per hour. Captain John McHugo, the flight leader, was vectored towards the radar blips but saw nothing, despite repeated attempts. After midnight on July 27, USAF Major Dewey Fournette, Project Blue Book's liaison at the Pentagon, and Lieutenant John Holcomb, a United States Navy radar specialist, arrived at the radar center at National Airport. They told him that a slight temperature inversion was present over the city, but Holcomb felt that the inversion was not nearly strong enough to explain the good and solid returns on the radar scopes. Fournette relayed that all those present in the radar room were convinced that the targets were most likely caused by solid metallic objects. Civilian aircraft also reported glowing objects that corresponded to radar blips seen by Andrews radar operators. As on July 20th, the sightings and unknown radar returns ended at sunrise. This condition can cause radar signals to bend and give false returns. At the event, Samford stated that the visual sightings over Washington could be explained as misidentified aerial phenomena such as stars or meteors, and unknown radar targets could be explained by temperature inversion, which was present in the air over Washington on both nights the radar returns were reported. Samford stated that the unknown radar contacts were not caused by solid material objects, and therefore posed no threat to national security. In response to a question as to whether the Air Force had recorded similar UFO radar contacts prior to the Washington incident, Samford said that there had been hundreds of such contacts where Air Force fighter interceptions had taken place, but stated they were all fruitless. It was the largest Pentagon press conference since World War II. press stories called Samford and Ramy the Air Force's two top UFO experts. Finally, as a crew member related, the radar had a target which turned out to be the Wilson Line steamboat trip to Mount Vernon. The radar was sure as hell picking up the steamboat. Air Force Captain Harold May was in the radar center at Andrews AFB during the sightings of July 19 to 20. Upon hearing that National Airport's radar had picked up an unknown object heading in his direction, May stepped outside and saw a light that was changing from red to orange to green to red again. At times it dipped suddenly and appeared to lose altitude. However, May eventually concluded that he was simply seeing a star that was distorted by the atmosphere, and that its movement was an illusion. At 3 a.m. on July 27, an Eastern Airlines flight over Washington was told that an unknown object was in its vicinity. The crew could see nothing unusual. When they were told that the object had moved directly behind their plane, they began a sharp turn to try to see the object, but were told by National Airport's radar center that the object had disappeared when they began their turn. At the request of the Air Force, the CAA's Technical Development and Evaluation Center did an analysis of the radar sightings. Their conclusion was that a temperature inversion had been indicated in almost every instance when the unidentified radar targets or visual objects had been reported. Project Blue Book would eventually label the unknown Washington radar blips as false images caused by temperature inversion, and the visual sightings as misidentified meteors, stars, and cities. In 2002, Class told a reporter that radar technology in 1952 wasn't sophisticated enough to filter out many ordinary objects, such as flocks of birds, weather balloons, or temperature inversions. The reporter added that UFO proponents argue that even then seasoned controllers could differentiate between spurious targets and solid, metallic objects. Class disagrees. It may be that we had two dumb controllers at National Airport on those nights. Class added that the introduction of digital filters in the 1970s led to a steep decline in UFO sightings on radar. In his book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, author Edward J. Ruppilt wrote that radar and control tower personnel he spoke to, as well as some Air Force officers, disagreed with the Air Force's explanation. Michael Wertheimer, a researcher for the government-funded Condon Report, investigated the case in 1966, and stated that radar witnesses still disputed the Air Force explanation. Former radar controller Howard Coughlin told the Washington Post in 2002 that he was still convinced that he saw an object, stating that, "I saw it on the radar screen and out the window over Washington National Airport." The panel recommended that the Air Force and Project Blue Book should take steps to strip the unidentified flying objects of the special status they have been given and the aura of mystery they have unfortunately acquired. Following the panel's recommendation, Project Blue Book would rarely publicize any UFO case that it had not labeled as solved. Unsolved cases were rarely mentioned by the Air Force.